Our place, this place, your place. The outlook for New Bern's future is made possible by the generous support of the Craven County Community Foundation, an affiliate of the North Carolina Community Foundation, Carolina East Health System, and by the financial contributions of viewers like you.
My vision for the future of New Bern as a native that was born and raised here is a holistic view, not just housing, not just development, not just industry, where everyone can choose to work here, they can choose to live here, and they can choose to spend their dollars in worship and fellowship with others. As I call New Bern a city of friends, it is the greatest place on earth.
New Bern has spent a lot of time investing in understanding what problems the community faces. The Choice Neighborhood Initiative gives great plans for implementing change in our community, and that will provide opportunities for better housing, better public transportation, to really connect people to advancing themselves in the future.
With development comes economic opportunity for everybody, and I think that's what we all want.
Development shows that you care, development shows that you're invested, and development shows that you're moving forward to the future.
The health of a downtown is absolutely critical. It is the economic engine that drives growth and development. If a downtown has died, it's a barometer that shows that there is a community that is not on the move, and people aren't interested in moving to a community that's not on the move.
As your workforce changes and your demographics change, you want to know how can you sustain your community. And there's so many different ways that you can do that. The studies that we're doing here and really trying to diversify our economic footprint, we don't want to just develop the outside parts of New Bern, but the inside parts of New Bern.
Now we're attracting a lot of young professionals. People are staying because there are jobs.
We're off to a great start, already implementing parts of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. However, the true opportunity is to have the people come together in New Bern, to have everybody from varied backgrounds collaboratively tackle the problems that we have and how we can even make the future brighter.
Well, let's jump right into the discussion. I want to start with Carl, right here beside me. Carl, you've had an experience, not here just in New Bern. You've been able to watch New Bern from the outside, watch Eastern North Carolina. One of the things I've always felt in terms of economic development is how important mindset is, having a positive mindset and looking at the assets that you have. Talk a little bit about what you see here in this community. What are the real assets of this community that others might miss without your perspective?
Sure. And right before I get to your question, I do want to thank UNC Public Media for putting this together. I know there was a lot of people locally with the city and the community that worked to put this together, so many thanks to them, and many thanks to all of you all for coming out this morning. It shows that New Bern does in fact care when we have this many people a couple days after a holiday early in the morning out to support their community. So to the question, as I think about New Bern, the first thing I think about is its age. This is actually a very, very old community. So if we think about it, we've been doing economic development in some form or another, whether it was building a ship or receiving pine tar from up the river or whatever the case may be, for more than 300 years, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Probably, it might not have been called this, but you've probably been through several cycles of redevelopment. There were probably some old shacks down by the river that became something else, it became something else, it became downtown New Bern today, and the cycle goes on. So although we sometimes change the terms and change the parameters, this is probably nothing new to New Bern. And the other piece to it is what a great canvas you have to work with. Every community has its challenges, and I know those will probably be discussed today. But you truly have one of the most beautiful towns on the east coast of the United States, and certainly in North Carolina. You are well located in terms of being close to the resources that you need for economic development, certainly close to the ports. You're able to attract people here with that beauty and proximity to the coast. And you have ample land available. We work with some communities where that's not the case anymore. There's not land either on the interior for redevelopment or on the exterior for the community to grow. So you have a lot of the ingredients that are necessary. I'm sure as we continue the conversation here, we'll bring up some of the challenges, as I said earlier. And then quickly, if I might, as we sort of frame the conversation, whether it was when I was working as a local economic developer some years ago, or now as I've had a chance to work with many communities across the state of North Carolina, when we talk about community economic development, there's kind of three pieces that I like to think about it. One is time, place, and then leadership. In terms of time, we live in the age of Instagram, instant gratification, social media. I think when we think about economic revitalization, community development, we're talking about a generational endeavor. And so I'm certainly happy to elaborate on that more, but I think we have to talk about things that are meant to last for 20 or 30 years and think about that as a time frame. When we talk about place, whether we draw a line around the corporate limits of New Bern or Craven County or of a particular redevelopment area in the urban core of New Bern, that often sort of sets that area apart, and that's okay. We need to know where we're looking at. But what we're really thinking about are what are the interactions that are going on inside of that space, whatever it's inside of that line, and how is what's going on there corresponding with what's going on outside of those lines? What are the interactions that are going on, or what are the interactions that we want to cause to happen? And finally, leadership. Economic development, and particularly urban revitalization, can be tough work. There's a reason that things are the way they are, and now we're talking about changing them. Sometimes that change can actually be a little scary once it starts happening. We say we want it, but then we start seeing what's going on, and it is change, and change can be a little frightening at times. And so what I've found, the communities that are able to succeed, and New Bern certainly has, you've had great eras of revitalization in your downtown and otherwise, is it takes a sustained leadership over a period of time, sometimes making some pretty consequential, pretty tough decisions to get that work done. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of those more.
Thank you. Let's segue off that. Jeff, I might turn to you next to talk a little bit about revitalization, talk about leadership in that regard and what's happening here, something very exciting, I think, with the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. Been able to read a little bit about that just in the last week, and it's, first, congratulations. As I read about it, New Bern is among nine locations across the U.S., I think, that was identified.
Correct.
And when you read that, every other city, it looked like to me, had a football team or a basketball team or somebody that you knew of. Perhaps others would not know New Bern who are from those other places. So congratulations on that. A very important role to play to make sure that economic and community development grows in the areas where it hasn't always grown in this region, into the 5 Points, the Duffyfield, we say uptown areas in this region. And so that's what the Choice Neighborhood Initiative is about. Talk to us about that and how that, the important role of leadership and the important role of the strategies to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, economic development and community development are actually separate things. They do work together, but the economic development part has to be kind of put aside when you talk about community development, because community development is much more all-encompassing. The Cni planning process that we went through, we looked at how do you replicate what we've been successful at in downtown New Bern, without forcing that same look and feel into the community. So the Cni planning effort, which was hundreds of volunteers, 200 to 300, we're talking thousands of hours of meeting time between these people over a 2-year process, kind of gave the reins to the community and said, how do you want your community to grow and look and feel? And the Cni plan is much more robust than a typical redevelopment plan. It looks at 5 different subsets of what makes a community grow. Health and human services, transportation planning, economic development, recreation, and the 5th one is eluding me like it always does, but there's 5. So we went through that whole process, and there was leadership that was very organic from the ground up. Each one of the 5 subsets had its own leader that really put together the agendas, that listened to what the community was saying and tried to address every concern that was coming up through the community, and how do we take that next step to get better. So leadership, community engagement, and putting all those 5 pieces together that really what makes community development, what makes a community grow and change over time, is what the Cni process was all about. And now we're in the implementation stage of that, and we'll probably talk about that a little later on. But the city has taken a lot of steps in implementing, even before the Cni plan. We went through a Renaissance Gateway planning study, which was another 2-year effort that focused on, it was an EPA grant, so we were really looking at how do we overcome the obstacles, the environmental obstacles that a lot of the properties face in the downtown area and in the greater Duffyfield area. But also, what does redevelopment look like? And we really focused on what people see when they're driving through New Bern. So we looked at corridors, and you'll look at some of the changes that we've made as a result of that planning is the extension of 3rd Avenue into the Stanley White Recreation Center, the beautification of that same intersection. We have a NCDOT project on First Street that's going to beautify that, make it more efficient and much more safer avenue to drive through in the city. We've done some other beautification projects with the Walt Bellamy Memorial that we did on Pollock Street. It's really a beautiful thing. We have another project that we are getting underway also to really make the corridors look better. Kind of when people come over the Cunningham Bridge, they know they're in New Bern. It's a beautiful place. We have another entryway into our city on First Street that really needs to look kind of and feel the same. It needs to feel special and look special, and that's what we're working on. And that's what we've been working on. And then we went into the Cni total community development effort. And we've made great strides in that. And just recently our board created our Redevelopment Commission, which is going to take the reins of that plan in those 5 pieces and start to really focus capital, both political and human capital, to get those things implemented that the plan talks about. So it's all about leadership, and it's all about communication and collaboration with the community.
Well, the commonality in both your comments has been about leadership, and I think something that's been important here, particularly as you move forward in the Cni, is thinking about leadership in that particular region of New Bern, which we all hope grows and develops in a way that it hasn't. I was thinking about that yesterday. Just have to do a quick shout out to a friend, Mary Peterkin, who I saw yesterday, who I remember 15 years ago walking into my office at Craven Community College to tell me about Uptown and how we need to get involved with Uptown. And Teresa Lee, who I saw this morning, talking about the surveys that she was involved in others. So it's leadership from within. And the brief conversation I had with Pastor Strayhorn earlier, that was what your message was about leadership from within. I think that's been your story from United Worship Center there in the Duffyfield community. Can you talk to us about an effort like this and how important leadership is from within and what that means to this kind of effort and what it can mean for the future and the opportunities that present themselves?
Well, people have to respect those that are approaching them about change. So our leadership within the community has to be strong, where people are able to trust them. Accountability is something that has to be great amongst people. The things that happen sometimes, we say things that we're going to do, and if it's not followed out, then people are not receptive to change. So leadership has to be something that is paramount when we are talking about community development. One of the things that God has allowed me to be able to do in the course of years is to try to make a greater impact in the community. By showing those that are there in the community that we are concerned about them, that we care about them. And if you show that and bring forth that as a leader, then you are able to get people to follow. But showing up and trying to subjugate change a lot of times brings about a lot of risks when it comes to people, because people are not willing to accept it because they feel like they don't have a voice. But the great thing about the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, that the people were able to come in. I was able to sit in several of those sessions, and we were able to voice our concerns and the things that we would like to see to transition within our community. So leadership is definitely something that has to be strong, and we have to be able to get that across to people, that we are leaders that are concerned about where they live, where they work, and also where they play. Because those 3 components are very important in the lives of people. And we have to be able to relay that to them, knowing that they are in the forefront of our minds when we're making those changes and development. So I feel like also community development must start within. And what I mean by that is that those pillars within the community must take their resources and start developing and building those areas. There at United, we've had the privilege to purchase 2 homes, and then 1 home was donated. Our goal was to clean up around our area, that we can control what goes on in that area. And so now we have 3 homes in that location, and some other properties there that we own. And I think that as the community continues to grow, it's vital for those leaders within that community to invest in that community. And grants are great, they are great, but I believe when people can take a stronger interest and ownership of their community, then you'll start having even more people gravitate to the change.
Can you share with us a little bit the inside of some of those conversations? You mentioned conversations, the concerns that were expressed, also the opportunities. Obviously, this isn't the first conversation that's taken place about development in the 5 Points, Duffyfield area. And so when people got together again based on this, the Cni, what were some of the opportunities people saw this time that maybe after looking at these issues in the past, but also what were some of the concerns? Share with us a little bit about that from the inside.
Well, some concerns was people was feeling like that there was going to be force into change, and when you think about being forced into something, that doesn't feel good. But if you allow me a platform that I'm able to voice my concerns and my opinions, then I'm going to be more willing to be receptive to that. The other thing is it's a large group of people that will not go to a work session, that you may be able to go house to house or in the streets and talk with them and say, look, this is what's going on. What do you think about this? What would you like to see happening? So I think when we look at the Duffyfield area, we have to be willing to go and be that foot soldier in the streets, hearing the voices of the people, that people might be able to know that we definitely are concerned about what they are feeling.
Let me ask you all to take this a little bit deeper in the sense that one of the things that in talking about the 5 Points area, or you could talk about other areas of eastern North Carolina and this county that are underdeveloped, if you will, but just looking in your region, there hasn't been a lack of leadership. There hasn't been a lack of desire, lack of motivation, a lack of plans, but one of the things that has been challenging is marrying that up with actual investment, where investment from the outside comes in to make the differences that we all strive for in places that mean so much to us. How do we this time around make that leap, get over that hump in terms of investment that marries with our strategy, marries with the plans, the desires, the leadership? I'll throw that open to any of you.
I'll take it, I guess. That's obviously the big question, right? There's a lot of little things that we can do. I touched on it earlier a little bit, is really just making it a better looking, safer, cleaner place. The city has a very active blight elimination program, essentially. We've done a great job of removing blight, and we're just starting to figure out what goes back when it goes back in. So the end game isn't to create a green field throughout Duffyfield. And what we've done to kind of plug the dam a little bit is we partnered up with groups like Habitat for Humanity, and we've donated 15, 16 lots to them in the past 3 to 4 years. They built 12 to 13 homes for new citizens in the greater Duffyfield area. So when you're trying to build a community, it starts with people. So you can ask businesses to come in and you can give them everything you want, but if there's no people there to support the businesses, and everything's going to fail. So community development always starts with people. Whether it's education, whether it's training, whether it's housing, it always starts with people. So in my opinion, we need to get people in there to go along with what the pastor is saying, to take ownership of their communities. And the more people we have in there with a sense of pride in their community, the rest of it takes care of itself. Yeah. But there's a lot a lot more to it than that, but that's our first step is to start to eliminate the blight and build new homes for new families in that area so they can take some pride in their community.
Well, that's an important point. I might, Carl, turn to you because I think you kind of lay out there that a lot of times when we think about economic development, we're talking about community development, we think about economic development, and when there's an announcement of a new business or a new employer of some type, you have the ribbon cutting, you have the announcement, and it seems like it's an overnight hit, but there has been oftentimes years and years of previous development and the small things that lead to the big thing that everybody celebrates. Your experience in economic development, does that ring true, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe to put a finer point on some of what Jeff was talking about, you have to think about this very intentionally. And for every funder, whether it be your local governments, your state government, your federal government, and the private sector, and different areas of the private sector, you have to think about what is it that is going to allow them to be part of what we are trying to accomplish here. Because each one of them is going to have a different funding requirement. Obviously, on the private sector side, for the most part, that's going to be a profit motive, among other things, but they do need to make a return on their investment. Federal, state, local government, slightly different drivers there. But in any case, you need to make sure that what you are trying to do with your plan aligns with the ability of those funders. To be more specific, if we're talking about housing development, there are quite a few housing developers in the nonprofit sector who can come in. You mentioned Habitat, Jeff. There's probably other local ones, and there's others statewide and in the region. They are usually pretty good about coming in and rehabilitating a home or perhaps building a new home on a lot. What they often lack the capacity to do and don't want to do as much is come in and buy a bunch of land and land bank, or go in and negotiate with multiple heirs to buy a particular property. So that can be a role of government funding, whether it be federal money through HUD or local money, to help set the stage by acquiring land. The same thing may apply in your commercial areas. Again, a commercial developer, if there's a market, might be very interested in coming in and building a new grocery store, less interested in being the one that comes in and has to deal with a bunch of different property owners on maybe some housing stock that's abandoned or not in really good shape, and dealing with that. They'd like to come in and have an acre or two that's ready to go to develop. And so I definitely think that in just about every community I've seen, there's a case for outside funding to come in. But again, you just have to be very, very intentional and think like a private developer, or think like state government, and what is it going to take to get them to put money into what we want to accomplish here in New Bern.
Yeah, I'm going to turn, because we're talking about housing. Can we segue to that? Well, you go first.
I want to go back to what I alluded to earlier about the pillars in the community, because when you look at bringing people from the outside to build, which is great, but also I think it's better when we can use those pillars in the community. We have churches on about every corner in Duffyfield. All the churches may not be able to take a property and renovate it, but there will be some. Why not the city allow those nonprofits to have ownership of those properties, to be able to create something there, and then you're giving it back to the people that are living in the communities. You're giving it back to them, and you're saying, it's yours now, make it work, create something. And I just believe when you do those type of things, people are saying, you value my ownership. You value who I am and my identity. Community development has to start with people feeling good about development. And when you start doing things like that, you're going to start having people that before would not, embrace change, will say, hey, I'm ready for change. Why? Because I am a part of this movement. So I think that there are some things, just like with Habitat, that there are some churches that are capable of going in, taking houses, and renovating those houses, And you know how I know that? Because we are an example of that.
Yeah, that's what I should talk about.
And we're not a large congregation. We are not a large congregation.
Well, you've mentioned this housing is a central part of this plan, but leader from within, housing's been part of your plans and strategies as United Worship Center. So why branch out into housing from where you've been? Talk about that.
Well, again, we were able to clean up around us. So that's a way that we could keep out someone coming in that we really would not prefer to be in our community. The other things there, we are able to control it because we have cameras that are up. So it's a safe environment. So if we could take a block and begin to start working in that arena, then it will help. It will help even crime. I mean, it will help in that area. But one of the things was houses. When we first got the houses, it was to help those that was re-enter into our communities, to help them to be able to get jobs, and we were able to do that. Also, people that was homeless. We've had people over the years that was homeless that was able to come and stay in one of our homes and get a job, and then able to move and make it on their own. So when you look at that, that is a tremendous way of being able to make an impact in people's lives. And then the thing is, the houses, they was right there. So they was right there beside the church. Mm-hmm. So it was a great investment that we was able to do. And then the thing is, you don't want to go in a community and tear down everything that may be dilapidated, because then again, you're still taking away my dignity, my identity. Now, I'm not originally from Craven County. I'm from Jones County, but I know the value of Craven County, Duffyfield area, the greater 5 Point area, and the people have a great love for the area, and I have a great love for the area. So I just feel that there's some great things that could occur if we would just look more within with the people that have no titles, no positions, and say, share with me, what would you do if we allowed you to have this property? Allow them to be creative and innovative with how to build their community. Jeff,
can you talk about housing? Housing, I guess, has been a central part of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. I know housing can often be the thorniest. I mean, Pastor Strayhorn, you brought up some of those issues about how you deal with that and some of the challenges around that. So how is the new planning taking on this, this big part of the plan, which is housing in that area?
Yeah, I mean, housing is kind of where I've always focused. I think Pastor Strayhorn is, we're kind of along the same lines here. It's about the people in the place, and I do agree with him 100% that the city's probably been too successful in tearing down homes, but oftentimes we're left with no choice. There aren't the leaders in the community to step up and say, I'm going to help you fix this home, and many of them are really beyond repair. But housing is always Housing has always been the biggest part about how we move forward. And as we take the next steps, as we created our Redevelopment Commission, we're going to be looking very hard at taking, because we are a CDBG entitlement city, so we do get a certain amount of funds from the federal government to invest in the greater Duffyfield Cni area. And we'll be looking at how do we do a better job at providing housing, what does it look like, and how can we leverage the city's resources, because we have so much property that the city and the county own jointly in that area that we've acquired through tax foreclosures, through demolition and things like that. And we've done a really excellent job of marketing those, providing them for sale for people in the community, and a lot of churches buy those properties. If we own property next to a church, we've sold a lot of that property to the adjacent property owners. And we've, again, partnered with Habitat. We've been looking for other groups to partner with. But as we move forward, it's not the single family detached. Maybe that's not the answer. We need a variety of different housing choices, and we'll be putting that together in the future as we talk about what community and economic development look like in the past, in the present, and the future. In the future, that is what we're looking at. And that's what we will be working on in the coming years, and providing a more viable, much more more housing options for people.
Do you see the revitalization of the Craven Terrace apartments, is that part of the plan or the discussion? How does that play in?
Well, I think that project was it was a one-off. It was a fix the issues that Craven Terrace was having with their recurring maintenance problems, bring in a private company to manage it, and they're doing an excellent job at what they're doing in keeping the community together, providing a sense of community within Craven Terrace where people are proud to be there and they're proud of their community. We've worked with the police department and Preservation Management, who is the operators of Craven Terrace, to clean up properties around it. So we work together there. But Craven Terrace is going to stay Craven Terrace for a while as we focus on our redevelopment efforts around that, and all the way from the train tracks down to the river, down to the Trent. We'll be looking at what does redevelopment look like from a housing standpoint, and how do we get that moving? Leveraging the city and federal and local resources and the community's input, and how do we get that done?
We've spent several minutes talking about housing, but both of you brought up in your conversation, all of you brought up about the different pillars that are there. And so when you look specifically staying and looking at the 5 Points, Duffyfield areas of the region, what do you see are other areas that need further development, more of a hand up, more leadership from within to develop beyond just housing for us to achieve the success that people have wanted for so many years? What do you see as other things we should stay focused towards that are very specific?
Transportation is definitely a major issue for that area. So it would be great to see, someone actually, really get seriously about providing transportation, maybe some city type of transit that we could have for the area.
I agree 100%. That was some of the information. There was a lot of much data that was collected through Theresa Lee and all her efforts with her volunteers to get survey data for that area. And 50% of the homes in the greater Duffield area have one car or less, one or zero cars. So transportation is a big problem, a big issue for people. And we've been working with Craven area rapid transit, the CART system, to try to look at their routes, see who they're serving, where are the generators, where are people coming from, where are people going, and see if we can fix routes and create a more consistent schedule that people can understand, because a lot of it's on-call kind of stuff, or maybe it's not as fast as people would like. I agree 100% transportation is part of creating a much more viable community, especially in a redevelopment area like this one that we're working in.
And what do you think is part of the plan? What's central to the transportation issues? What will be the investment that's needed there? What's the conversation in that regard right now?
The conversation is, what do the routes look like? When do they run? Where do they start from? Where do they go? So we're looking at that exactly. Where's the generators? Where are the people coming from? Where are the people going to, and what times? A lot of the comments that we received is, I believe, it shuts off at 5. And so how late do we need to run this to keep it active, to keep it viable, and to keep providing a service to the community? Does
the transportation conversation, we'll talk a little later about education, but do you see the transportation education conversation coming together?
Absolutely.
I knew that was always something we talked about.
100%, yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Volt Center and all the effort that's been going on there, and transportation is a part of that also.
Carl, take a step back here. You know this region, the whole eastern region. You've seen successes, in a lot of things. I think that when we talk about economic development, this issue of persistence is somewhat underappreciated. I know even in places like the Research Triangle Park, where the feeling is you fall into economic development, but the Research Triangle Park was years and years of skepticism. Is anything ever going to happen? Then all of a sudden something starts to happen and something builds. What have you seen in, just thinking about eastern North Carolina, regions like ours here, where you've seen a success come from the development of the pillars that you talked about?
Well, I mean, one thing that I think we're all seeing, and I saw the placards this morning when I drove in from my home in Wilson, North Carolina, is I think it took the state of North Carolina entirely too long to bring interstate service throughout eastern North Carolina. And as I drove in today on Future 42 and saw those interstate placards, that's a big deal. And let me tell you, for the people that are in northeastern North Carolina, Future I-87 is a big deal. 795 that's done now is a big deal. And so that's something that took many years in the making to get that on the ground today, that allows North Carolinians and people from all over the state to have much better access to New Bern and to our coast and to the Northeast and throughout all of eastern North Carolina. But bringing it in a little bit more to Craven County and New Bern, and then even down to the community that we're talking about. I remember many, many years ago when I was very new to this, but also a lot of energy and passion in doing affordable housing development work. We were doing all this work and qualifying people of low and moderate income and preparing them for home ownership is great work, and it can also be hard work and rewarding work. But one day it just kind of dawned on a group of us young folks that were working on this that how stupid would we be if we shoehorn people into houses and they don't have good enough jobs or good enough educations to continue getting good jobs to pay for the house. I think we're actually doing them more of a disservice than we are doing them a service, and that was an early realization. And I tell that story to say that I think finding pathways, ladders, whatever terms that you want to use to help people in these communities get into sustainable, livable wage employment is a critical part of this. And I will say that I think New Bern has been working hard on this and is working hard on this. But again, it's not easy work, and I'm pretty sure most anybody associated with this work would say we've got more work to do in that area. And you've dedicated a career to this, Scott, so you know better than anybody. But I think that's just a critical piece. If you want to have stable neighborhoods with people that can afford to keep their homes up and so on, they've got to have living wage jobs.
Well, I think one thing, too, a comment that I hear from you all, you've talked about the pillars of community development, the pillars of economic development, but they can't be silos. They can't just stand beside, they have to be very connected to each other. So when you're talking about transportation and education and housing and redevelopment and things, they all have to be strategically connected in that regard. Now, when we use terms like Redevelopment Commission and being, I'm intrigued by being the leader from within, Pastor Strayhorn, what do you hear when you hear that term Redevelopment Commission? What does that mean to the people who are the notion being redeveloped?
Well, when you hear that, then the first thing that comes to mind is there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong with me, or something wrong with something. So I think that we have to use language that people relate to as being positive. Mm-hmm. Everyone may not look at redevelopment as something as being a positive but a negative, because if it's a home, if it's a community where I live and it's a part of who I am, then you are looking from the outside. Yeah. You are prejudging me on what it is that you see that may not appear to be what you would like.
Yeah, one person's perspective of Blight is another person's home.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we have to be very cautious when we are having those conversations with people to make sure that our motives are pure and that we're using language that is not over their heads, that they can understand and is relatable to them. Yeah.
I'm an educator, and there's lessons of that in education. People talk a lot about education reform, and if you walk into a place and start talking about, I'm here to reform you, it doesn't usually go too well. But what you find, though, is that I think this is what I've seen in the community, we've been talking about the broader community here, is that when you approach it in a togetherness about growing together and growing up and being, when I say growing up, growing collectively beyond where you are right now, then remarkable things happen. And sometimes, again, that big thing that just seems to pop out of nowhere is really the result of lots of little things that got there to this part. Jeff, let me, we're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes and take some audience questions. But before we do that, and we've been talking about patience and persistence and building up and the little things building up. And so, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative is probably the most significant, having the resource that was never there before for this kind of planning. But it's not the first time. You mentioned other forms of efforts that have been before. What do you think can be different this time? But what will it take for this to be the one that gets us over the hump and not just the next in the series?
Yes, a two-part question. What's different this time? And I wasn't involved in any of the. I've been here 6.5 years. I came here right at the tail end of the previous Renaissance Gateway planning effort, which was robust and had some excellent recommendations that come out of it that we've been able to put on the ground. But what's different about CNI is it's even more robust, right? It hits the 5 pillars of what a community needs to grow in a positive direction. And it was driven 100% by input from the community. So I use that, and I cringe when and I really appreciate you really jumping on my mistake that I made about the Redevelopment Commission. And I didn't want it to sound like it's a new thing coming in. I'm joking.
But I think the conversation.
I couldn't. Everyone knows me. No, I couldn't sit up here the whole time and not make a joke. But it is members of the community, many of which were involved in the CNI process. We'll be using the CNI plan as the blueprint to implement the plan that was created by the community and by the citizens themselves. So with that, I think it can be a lot different if we stay focused on it and keep picking off doable things, and we keep working together as we've done in the 6.5 years I've been here. And I don't see that changing for any reason, because we've been so successful in the past few years with getting support from the community, from our elected officials, and getting things done that changes the face of the community, that makes people's lives better. So will it be different? I don't know what it was like in the past, but I know what it's been since I've been here, and we've been very successful, and we're in a very fortunate place to be in a city where so many people care about doing the right thing and helping people out.
Yes, please, Carl.
Yeah, I had a chance to think while you were talking, Jeff, and I've been really fortunate in a 20-year career to be parts of a lot of great things in Eastern North Carolina and now around the state. But as I sit here and think, I think that professionally what I treasure the most was sometimes about 15 years ago when we were in the early stages of a process like you all are now undertaking here in New Bern. And we had distrust. We had a lot of questions and fear about the future. And I talked about leadership earlier. We were able to work together with members of that community to gain just enough trust to get started. And I always used to say, I think I picked this up out of some movie, but don't go by what I say, go by what I do. Just watch what we do, forget about what you're hearing and what the talk is, watch what actually happens. So as you move along and you start doing things, the decisions get bigger and the decisions get tougher, and the opportunities get bigger as well. And so what I treasure the most were some votes that were actually taken on our Redevelopment Commission by members of the community in question that were hearing all kinds of rumors and probably people in the background telling them not to do this. But they took the vote and raised their hand and said yes, because they had enough trust and they believed at that point that it was the right thing for the community. And I remember them sitting there saying, I'm going to catch hell for this vote, but it's the right thing to do, yes.
Well, I'm going to wrap up with that if I can, because I know when we started this conversation, all three of you have demonstrated you're great leaders in this process, but you started off talking about the importance of leadership in that kind of theoretical, but then as you closed, you talked about what leadership really is. It's about trust. It's about actions, not just talk. It's about persistence and patience and moving forward. And it's about leadership, and it's about, I think, to make a difference, it takes the external leadership that's going to bring investment to a place that's not where there hasn't been investment before, and it certainly takes the internal leadership to lead from within. And so I think as someone who was in some of those conversations years ago, I just applaud you for what you're doing. And I would say, too, keep up the persistence and the patience, because sometimes when you don't see the immediate rewards, it's easy to say, are we making progress? But from someone who's been on the outside and just had a chance to drive through yesterday and have conversations, you see the progress, and keep it up, because leadership is what leads people to stay positive in times when sometimes it feels like you're not making as much progress as you would like. So thank you for what each of you are doing in that regard. And let's open it up, if we can, to some questions. We have two ways here for you to be able to give your questions. Some of you have already responded in terms of sharing a question or comment by social media or the hashtag CARES New Bern, hashtag CARES New Bern. And we are fortunate to have UNC-TV Public Media North Carolina producer and host Deborah Holt-Noel, who's going to be sharing some of those comments from social media, and will also help us as we take questions from the audience and keep this conversation going with these three leaders in our community here who are making a real difference. So, Deborah.
Thanks so much. And we've already gotten a number of comments on Twitter, and just reminding you once again that you can send your comment or even a question on Twitter using the hashtag that's on the screen, CARES New Bern. We've heard from Theresa Lee, who remarks, Pastor Strayhorn is talking about leadership from within the community to have sustainable redevelopment. Hashtag housing matters. Housing always is the elephant in the room. These are great panelists. We also have a question from Sharon Bryant, who wants to know about Duffy Field's need for transportation in homes. And then a comment from Talina Massey, who asks, what 5 points needs is strong grassroots leadership and investment opportunities, plus resources that actually reach that community instead of using it for its statistics to secure funds and a labor source for other areas of the city or votes. Collateral is key. Hashtag CARES New Bern. I also saw a question asking, what does CIN stand for? So I think that's the choice initiative.
CNI, I think is what
CNI. Yes, what does CNI stand for? So if you could respond to some of those comments, that would be great. And we also have a gentleman who's come up. That was your question. Okay. Thank you.
CNI is the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. It's a HUD program, pretty robust. As we heard earlier, that the city was one of the, I don't think there's anyone smaller in population size that received the grant. It is reserved for large subsets of large cities like Atlanta, Austin, St. Louis, places like that are the ones that get the CNI grant. So we were extremely fortunate to get the grant and be able to do what we did with the resources that we have.
If I may, you have a great website for that. Do you remember that? I'll have to look it up here.
You can go to the city website, the City of New Bern website, and go to Development Services, and there's on the side.
ChoiceNeighborhoodsInitiative.com.
Oh, excuse me. All right, maybe it's easier than that. ChoiceNeighborhoods.com. ChoiceNewBern.com. All right. And it's also on the Development Services webpage.
One thing, too, I'd like to just emphasize, too, that I've seen as having that resource, that's a huge resource that was never here before in the previous iterations of efforts. And so that's that in of itself, and New Bern and that company of cities really is quite an accomplishment that means opportunity there.
It puts us in line to receive other programs that we've gone through, a successful program like CNI, and created such a wonderful usable document that we're implementing. It really keeps us on the radar in the future for other opportunities that come down that we can take advantage of if we choose, if it'll help implement some of the things that we're trying to do in the plan. So it is excellent.
Quick comment on, somebody mentioned the housing, and Jeff, you talked about this briefly, but I couldn't agree more with your comment, is thinking about housing, years ago when I started this, home ownership was all that we concentrated on, helping people get ready to buy a house and go into that house and keep the house. That's great. But if we think about it overall, home ownership is down in the U.S. We've got many, many more people that prefer to rent in some version or another. And so I think, as Jeff very correctly mentioned, that providing a variety of quality, affordable housing styles or options for people is very important. So while there certainly are people that will want to stay in their home and find a way to fix it up, some people would like to buy a new home that was built in a particular neighborhood. Perhaps seniors, perhaps young people would prefer to be in some less permanent style of housing, like apartments for seniors or affordable housing apartments. So anyway, just a thought there about that.
I think we have a question, Deb.
I just want to encourage people to come up to the microphone. This is what it's here for. We want to hear from you. This is a back and forth conversation. This is interactive. So this is your opportunity. I've been seeing heads nod around the room on some of the comments. And so this is your time. We want to hear from you, New Bern. So please come up to the microphone, or if you'd like to send a tweet out, send that tweet on Twitter using the hashtag CaresNewBern. Not necessarily on Facebook, but on Twitter. Thanks.
Are we ready?
Please go right ahead.
We're ready. Good morning, and thank you for having this forum. I would like to emphasize that Duffy Field was not just a housing development. So housing is not the only need. And there's a lot of cottage industry within that community that could be developed to begin to draw other people into the community. I would suggest that we take a look at the SMART program in Kinston. Kinston is using their in need of renovation housing stock to draw artists that will help bring community together. And they just had their first art walks in one of their poorest neighborhoods this past summer. So I would like to see the development of Duffy Field to not just be a housing development with a labor workforce, but to actually have industries, creative spaces, etc., that will bring people into that community so that people would want to go there, to be there, to play there, to shop there. And I think that's a part of development that we need to keep in mind. It's not just housing and transportation.
Can you tell, when you step up to the mic, will you tell us your name and who you're with when you...
My name is Lorelei Schaffhausen, and I'm with C5, that's the Community Collaborative for Craven County Children, and Faith Connection, an organization of 19 congregations, over 90 members, that do things community-wide.
Okay. Jeff, Lester?
There are a lot of things that is going on within our communities. I don't think that, by no means, that we are just focusing on housing. Housing has come up because that's one of the major issues that we face. But there are a lot of other things that we have that is going on within our community that have been a success. But as we move forward collectively, again, I think it would be great to be able to hear from the people the things that they would want to have within that community, that they feel good about, feel safe about, that would want to draw others in to want to come and invest in our community.
Good morning. My name is Jamisha Harris, and I'm the Alderwoman for Ward 2, which represents part of Duffy Field and Craven Terrace. And I just first want to just commend that we are having this conversation. This forum is so necessary. And I am new to the city. I'm an implant. I've been here 8 years, and I'm new to politics. And during my campaign, I had the ability to be able to walk around and talk to some of the individuals that represent these communities. And some of their concerns are more or less that, you know, you see local government, you see investors come in and they just fix the outside. They make it look pretty on the outside. And they're afraid to get deeper into the communities and to try to, you know, embark on what we would call redevelopment and change. And I think for me, the question or what we struggle with as individuals are, you know, going into a community where, like Pastor Strayhorn said, it's their history. You know, these individuals don't trust us, and they feel like that, you know, we're using them as, you know, Talina stated on her message, as for statistics, for, you know, labors, for votes and jobs like that. So we want to know, how do we combat that so that they know that we are here, we do care about them, we do want to have a positive change in the community. How do you have that conversation, or how do you implement that when we want to do redevelopment, that we want it to be positive and not negative? How do you get past that negative notion that we don't care about the individuals, that we only want to beautify the outside, the corridors of that area, and not deep within that we call, you know, the blighted area?
Yeah, one of the things that would be great is to go to the people and ask them within their community, who do they see as leaders within their community. When we start to go into them and we allow them to be able to voice who they see and who they trust, every community has a group of leaders that the individuals in that community trust. So start allowing those individuals to be the spokespersons for those changes or enhancements that we would like to see in our community, because they have developed that relationship with those leaders, and they are able to trust them.
And Jeff, I read, so when I was reading into the planning work and the efforts, I saw the deliberate efforts to address that. Can you talk a little bit about that with the Choice Neighborhood Initiative?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've touched on it a lot. It's trust, and it's built over time, and it's success is how you build the trust, and we need time to get to our next success. So it is correct that we have been picking at the edges. That's been deliberate. Because the idea is to set a new edge and work your way back in, and that's been the marching orders from how we started. But the idea doesn't end at the edges. The idea ends when the entire place is redeveloped, and as we talked about earlier, is that takes time, and sometimes we're going to get questions on nothing's happening and why is nothing happening. But when you get a person who's been gone for 10 years and they take a drive back through New Bern, they see all the changes that the people that live here don't see. They don't notice it when it just happens. It's happening very slowly over time, but leave and come back and you get to see a lot of different things. I'm a planner by trade, so I see things new every day. I see things in a new way every day, and I notice the changes. I've been involved in a lot of it, and over the 7 years that I've been here, this city has changed tremendously for the better, and it just takes time. And again, success will breed success, and as long as we keep working towards the goal and we keep having conversations with the community, including everybody in it, as long as we still want to get better, we will get better. New Bern is a city of dreamers and a city of doers, and that's what I've seen since I've been here, and we've been extremely successful in everything that we've attempted.
And I'll just say, having been here and now being back, I think that is uniquely New Bern. Keeping that mindset is crucial to making the type of progress that everybody wants to see even faster, but is happening as you come back and see. Another question.
I'm Sandy Bruno, and I know we only have 1 minute left, but I am not involved with the housing redevelopment or the economic development. I am involved with the arts community. And I just wanted to share with all of you that we recently offered free classes for residents of Craven Terrace. And it turned out to be primarily women, middle-aged women who often don't come out of their community to experience hands-on art. So they came to our little gallery downtown, and each one got to make something special. This was a 3-week program, and it within the next few weeks, we're going to be offering classes at Craven Terrace, again, free. And my goal in life is to share art and therefore to let everyone, primarily at this point through Craven Terrace, understand that we can all evoke our all internal spirituality through our art. So I just, I'm so proud of everybody who's doing everything here in New Bern and all the things that we're sharing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think your comments, and I guess we'll wrap up the questions there. I made reference to, I couldn't find a better phrase, but to refer to strategic neighborliness, and I think what you just described was a great example of strategic neighborliness. And I again applaud the leaders on this stage and all the leaders in this community for both the strategy in which you go about your work here, but also the patience and the persistence and the leadership you demonstrate by building trust through actions and one step at a time. So if we may, can we give a round of applause to our panel here?
Our place, this place, your place. The outlook for New Bern's future is made possible by the generous support of the Craven County Community Foundation, an affiliate of the North Carolina Community Foundation, Carolina East Health System, and by the financial contributions of viewers like you.